Welcome back, everyone, to Prescribed Vibes. I'm Stephanie,
And I'm Sierra.
and today we're going to talk about something that quietly runs so many of our lives but rarely gets named out loud. And we covered this a little bit in our last episode. It's shame.
Yes, last week we talked about accountability and acceptance, and I mentioned the kryptonite to accountability is shame. So today we're going to talk a little bit more, thanks to a request from one of you guys, about shame and what that looks like and how to navigate that. So this is a topic that everyone has experienced shame. Most people don't realize, though, how deeply rooted it can be and how deeply it's shaping their thoughts, their relationships, our nervous system, the way we perceive ourselves. Like shame, when I say it's a kryptonite, she powerful.
Totally. And, shame isn't just feeling bad about something you did, it's the belief that something is wrong with who you are. So it can quickly go into the slippery slope that I mentioned in the last episode. It starts to take shape into those negative core beliefs that something's wrong with me, I'm a bad person. So it's a lot more than just that feeling. It can really easily turn into that belief of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It works under the assumption that we are wrong and we're failing and that we should, right? I love
Hmm.
to tell my clients, don't should all over yourself. Shame causes us to should all over ourselves. And so because it feels so personal and so isolating, we tend to be really quiet about our shame too, right? We don't want people to see that weakness or bring attention to the thing we feel shameful about, which gives shame more power.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to feed into that. We're going to break down what shame is, how it shows up, how it's different from guilt because there are two different things, and how it impacts our relationships, our sense of self worth, and most importantly, is how to start loosening its grip so it doesn't have as much power as sometimes we give it.
Yeah. So let's start with defining what shame is because a lot of times we get confused between guilt and shame.
Simply put, think about it this way: guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong.
And that distinction matters so much, right? Because when we say I did something wrong, that's an action. When we say I am something wrong, that's part of our identity. And we're going to talk about identity sometime soon too, because I don't think people recognize how much our identity really drives obviously who we are and our experiences and how we move through the world too. But when we identify with this shame, when we carry shame, that impacts our identity. Guilt can motivate repair. I did something wrong. What can I do differently? How do I fix it? Shame makes us want to hide and it tells us that we're wrong.
And I don't think a lot of us know or realize that the shame usually develops early. It often starts to come up from experiences where our emotions, our needs, or our behaviors weren't met with understanding. So, if you were growing up and you weren't met with understanding, compassion, and grace, it's likely you're not going to be able to give those things to yourself, at least not consistently. So it's something to recognize that it does start early on. And we hope to be able to give you some of the tools and reframes to work with that.
Yeah, it can come from being criticized, compared, ignored, punished, or even subtly shamed through tone or silence. And honestly, like the things that we observe in the world, in media, in society, the comparison, right? Other people comparing us, but ourselves comparing. It's something to really pay attention to of like almost projecting onto ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that internal voice, right? Now our self talk can be flooded from the shame, the feelings that we have.
And shame doesn't always look dramatic. A lot of times it looks like perfectionism. It looks like overperforming. It looks like trying, like being really preoccupied with how we're perceived and what image we put out there. It's because it's so silent and below the surface, it's not incredibly easy to clock.
So when you said perfectionism, there's other things that come to mind. So with shame, the way it could look like people pleasing, overachieving, avoiding vulnerability, or this chronic feeling of not enough, even when things look good on the outside. So those are just some things to keep in mind on how it really shows up for us in adult life.
Yeah, and it can show up as avoidance and procrastination. Like people assume that procrastination is laziness or avoidance is not caring, but it's often shame driven for fear of getting something wrong, for being outed, for being seen, that shame coming to the surface. And so avoiding and procrastinating things that are important, that are necessary, that are our responsibilities, like shame can bring our whole world down.
Yeah, exactly. And our whole world, and it's really how people relate to their bodies. Shame can show up in your relationship with food, money, parenting, sex, and really even success.
A lot of like I should, again, that shoulding is shame. So first line of defense against your shame is catching a should. When you find yourself saying I should, I should, I should, I should, or I shouldn't, I should feel this way, I should have accomplished this thing, I shouldn't feel this way, I should be over it by now, I should be, should. That is shame trying to dictate you. And if you can catch that and say, no, should who, according to whom, who's the lawmaker that created this should law for me? Who says?
Right, yeah, the should. And that's, going into that it's really not just cognitive. We're going to talk about how shame impacts our nervous systems because it's physiological. It's not just cognitive and just our beliefs.
Yeah, when shame gets activated, the nervous system gets activated, and often it'll go into either collapse or freeze. We're going to go into survival mode, fight or flight, when we are overcome with that shame. Run away from something that's inside of you.
Right, yeah. And when you were saying the collapse and the freeze, that can look like shutting down, disassociating, avoiding eye contact. You might feel heavy or you just simply want to disappear.
Yep, and because shame is so uncomfortable, and again, it's trying to run from something inside of you, so people often are gonna cope with shame through numbing behaviors and coping strategies.
Oh, yeah. There's so many, unhealthy coping strategies. There's scrolling. You can be overeating, overworking, drinking, isolating, constantly trying to distract yourself from the feeling of shame. So it can show up in so many different ways.
So when we're talking about healing shame, we're not just talking about positive thinking and shifting those thoughts, those beliefs, the way we're addressing ourselves. We're also talking about safety in the body, like not being your own enemy anymore and feeling a sense of safety and security and alliance with yourself so that you can feel safe within your body. You're not trapped in a cell with someone who's trying to hurt you anymore.
Yeah, so moving on from that safety in the body, we're going to talk about how shame shows up in relationships. And oftentimes, shame thrives in isolation. It's that withdrawing, you just retreat, you want to be by yourself, you don't want to show up to places or around people. And that can deeply impact our relationships. And so we're going to get into that.
Yeah, and that's so true, right? Like when you are around people who you perceive to be better than you, more successful than you, you're going to not feel great about yourself around those people if you're projecting shame onto yourself. They're better than me, and that makes me feel bad about myself. That makes me feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to avoid these people, and that's going to impact our relationships. People with a lot of shame assume they're too much or not enough. They're, again, it just comes back to being something is wrong with me,
And
and that's
that
not acceptable.
Yeah, something is wrong with me. And then sometimes it can take form of needing to over explain, apologizing excessively, or it can go in the opposite direction where you just completely stay quiet. Again, that isolation to avoid rejection.
Or the opposite, being really defensive or critical or emotionally distant. A lot of times when we are being very critical and judgmental of ourselves, we are going to be very critical and judgmental of others as well, which just really deepens the roots and solidifies that shame within our whole internal world.
And then it really just compromises your ability to be vulnerable, right? Because you're going to be less vulnerable if you're feeling shame. If you believe at your core that you're flawed, closeness is going to feel risky. You're going to, again, isolate, pull away, withdraw, push people away because you don't want to risk that vulnerability. You're not ready for that.
Yeah, and shame and accountability kind of going hand in hand, right? Where they get those lines get blurred. It's that healing shame does not mean avoiding responsibility. Like, oh, if I'm not, that's a common belief that I come up against in sessions is, well, if I don't shame myself, basically, if I don't hold myself quote unquote accountable through what is wrong with you, do better, why can't you do this, right? Like that shame being the motivation, we think, oh, well, then I just won't care anymore. I won't do better. I won't succeed. I won't grow. Where it's like, healing shame doesn't mean avoiding responsibility, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to still want to accomplish the things you want to accomplish and be the person you want to be. It just means that your motivation, I always use Monsters Inc.
Mhm.
as a reference for this because right in Monsters Inc. they're using screams as energy, right? And that's negative, right? Like scaring these kids using their screams to power the whole city. And then in the end, they find out laughter is 10 times more effective. They get 10 times more energy from laughter than screams. And so I'll use that analogy a lot in talking about what happens when we replace shame with compassion and motivate ourselves from a place of love rather than shame. It's
I
so
love
much more
that.
effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps. I love what we do.
Oh, I really love that. I want to actually watch it today. I haven't, I heard of it, but I've never watched it. And
What?
yeah, laughter is something that I can so relate to. I feel like maybe it is one of my coping skills to turn things into humor, but really it's so important to be able to laugh things and laugh at things and laugh at yourself and be playful. Not everything has to be so serious. And with that said, we've talked about how two opposite things can be true at the same time. So just as you were saying, you can acknowledge the harm, you can take accountability and still hold that compassion for yourself. So, shame doesn't mean avoiding that responsibility. It doesn't mean you're not accountable. It means that you can do both. Take the accountability and have that compassion for yourself.
Yeah, because you have to, and this is something I talk about a lot too, is consider in relationships before you react, consider someone else's motivation. But when you're judging and shaming yourself, consider your own motivation. You know yourself well enough to know, did I do that intentionally? Did I do that out of malice? Did I do that because I don't care, because I'm lazy, because I really do suck, I'm really not good enough? Or was I trying my best and I just didn't get it right? And I can figure out what to do differently next time and upcycle it and move forward instead of staying in this spiral of shame where nothing gets addressed or resolved, nothing improves, and we just sit in the yuck indefinitely.
Exactly. Shame can really keep people stuck, and accountability, like we talked about last week, allows growth. So, keep those things in mind.
Well, and here's something to consider too. We almost have to be accountable for our shame. And so the first step in addressing this is to name it. You have to be willing to acknowledge and be accountable for the fact that you feel that shame in order to do something about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that, shame is useful. It's not like we're never going to feel shame and it's bad to feel shame. It is useful because it allows you to take a further look into yourself without it being an overgeneralization that I'm a bad person. It's like, okay, I did this thing and now I'm going to figure out how to fix it or how to repair or what I need to do next. But it is really important that we're not saying here, you're not going to feel shame, don't feel shame ever. It's like, okay, it's there and what are we going to do with that?
Yep. It loses its power when we address it. And that's true of most things. Saying it out loud, addressing it, acknowledging it, taking accountability for it takes a lot of the power away. So, and then get curious. Don't judge yourself. That's not helpful either. Curiosity is huge when it comes to mental health and counseling, like compassionate curiosity for others, compassionate curiosity for yourself. Where is this judgment coming from? Like you said, what does it tell me? It gives me some information. And so being intentional around that and saying, okay, well, does it tell me that I acted out a character and I don't like being that person, a person who does or says those kinds of things, who presents themselves this way, who moves through the world that way. So I want to adjust that because that's going to feel better and more aligned with the person that I want to be. Like what can we gather when we look a little bit closer about why we feel shameful about that thing? Why is it important to us?
And, we're having a conversation about this and you're listening to this podcast, and we hope you are able to take away what we're talking about. But I think what this really is, it's a skill, and it's something that we have to recognize that it is a skill that you implement and you learn it, you're aware of it, and you repeat it. So, although we're having a conversation, one of the things that we talk about with our clients is how do you use this skill consistently? How do you incorporate it into your routine? How do you take time to ask yourself some of these questions? So, it could sound like some of the questions you can ask yourself when it comes up is, where did I learn this belief about myself? Whose voice does this sound like? Because usually it's not your voice, it's a voice that came from maybe a caregiver or a parent or someone very much close to you.
Yeah, and it might not always be so identifiable, but even just to ask ourselves, wait, do I actually agree with that? Do I believe that? Does that align with my values, or is that something that has somehow been imposed on me in some way, and I can make adjustments now that it's been brought to my attention? Also notice how your body responds when your shame shows up. Where do you feel it? And try to address it somatically lots of different ways. I have been feeling really anxious the last couple days, and something new that I've been doing is almost imagining my nervous system like in my gut. And it's not anatomically correct or anything like that, but it's just this little character that I've created to place with this feeling in my stomach. And I've just been like nurturing it and being like, hey, I know you're freaking out, but you're okay. Like, protecting it almost and being like, we're all right, self-soothing. And so there's lots of different ways that we can, either through imagery, through different physical or mental exercises, to address those feelings in our body in order to help us move through it and cope and regulate.
That's really sweet. It reminds me, I had a client name one of her parts, and we both almost like envisioned this little guy in her shoulder. And it's so cute, and it's really whatever works for you, right? Just keeping in mind that you can be creative with it. It is your way of relating back to yourself. Sometimes I even forget to breathe. I'm recognizing that I'm just going. I'm like, whoa, I haven't really taken any deep breaths. So, as you talk about how your body responds to it, it can look like very just gentle grounding, slowing your breath down, feeling your feet, orienting to the room that you're in, looking into breath work. That's something that we should probably cover in another episode, but just those simple techniques that we forget about.
Yeah, we should definitely do an episode on different coping and self-soothing and DBT skills and things like that. I would just give everybody a big toolbox episode. Try all these things and see what you like.
Yes.
And when you speak about naming her parts, I'm thinking, there's probably some people listening who aren't going to know what that means.
Yeah, that's true. So it's this part of you, right? That it's you could break it down to different personalities that we all have or different parts, and that part can be the shame part in you, right? Or we have this resilient part. So the shame part can look like a little person on your shoulder, like, oh, there's my shame. And then we can get into that in other episodes, but it's really just a part in you that exists, and we all have different parts.
Well, and just since we're on the topic of parts and you bring up like a shame part, right? Ironically enough, from my perspective, I think shame comes from protective parts.
Right.
Shame is trying to protect us by best preparing us and shaping us into the person that's going to be the most acceptable, the most loved. And we need that for survival and connection in the back of our mind. And so I think shame is trying to be protective, but she's a little misunderstood.
Exactly. And it means, also that you're going to be treating yourself the way you treat someone you love who's struggling. So that self-compassion is something to keep in mind. How would you treat someone that's struggling, giving that back to yourself?
Yeah, and this is cliche for therapy, right? And everyone's like, I know, what would I say to a friend?
Right.
But genuinely, like, you should be your best friend, and your best friend should be showing up and saying some helpful, compassionate, kind, motivational, real things to ourselves. Like, be your own best friend. Don't be harsh with yourself because you think that that shame is going to drive you to do better. You wouldn't expect that shame to drive your friends to do better.
Yeah, give yourself permission. Like yesterday, I was like, you know what? I deserve this mental break. I'm going to have fun today. I've experienced some stress and definitely some shame has come up, and giving yourself that permission that it's not lazy or complacent. Shame often tells people that kindness will make them that way, and it's not true. It's not. It's allowing yourself to give yourself that grace and empowerment. It's being your own best friend, just like you said.
Yeah, and so, right, again, just speaking to the shift from shame to compassion being the motivator, like research and clinical work shows that compassion is actually what supports change. So, like I said, give yourself permission, and if you have to use that fact to allow yourself that permission to say like, okay, well, I know that I usually work, with the shame as the motivator, but that's not working for me. It's not doing what I need it to do. Research says, clinical work shows that compassion supports the change, so I'm going to allow myself to give that a try. What do we have to lose? If it's not working, go back to being mean to yourself. I doubt you will, though.
Pivot. Pivot.
Pivot.
So, pivot, as we talk about that, we're going to
Mhm.
cover a practical reframe, a simple reframe, and we use this in therapy. And Sierra's going to cover some of that.
Okay, so instead of asking what's wrong with me, ask what happened to me. Again, get curious in a way that's compassionate about where is this coming from? What we can get into shadow work and inner child work in this too, parts work, right? But like, what part of me, what version of me, what experience did I have that led me to hold myself to this standard, to value this thing so much, to judge myself in this way?
And that simple question you just said it really shifts that focus from defect to context.
Yes, because if you look into neurobiology at all and the way that our neurons work, our psyche is completely made up of different types of implicit and explicit memory. And memory gives us the roadmap, the blueprint for what's what. And so that's malleable. We can shift that, we can override it with new information. And so when we open that door to understanding ourselves instead of attacking ourselves, we have a lot more room to work.
100%. And as we close this out, we do want you to take away a few things, but one that is really important, and we've covered it, it's, shame is not proof that you're broken.
1,000%. Shame is a signal, something inside of you that you learned to protect yourself. Like I said, it's a protective part. And so get curious about it, not reactive.
It doesn't need punishment, it just needs safety. Keep that in mind.
And you don't heal shame by getting better. You heal it by being kinder to yourself in the moments where you want to hide, in the moments when you're rejecting yourself.
So, we hope this episode was helpful, insightful. We're always open to your feedback and let us know how you're doing with navigating shame. Please keep the door open to share how you've been doing.
Absolutely. Remember, we got to bring it out into the light, take its power away. So talk about it. And if you can't talk about it with anyone else, talk about it with yourself first and foremost.
Thank you, everyone, so much for spending time with us on Prescribed Vibes.
Today's vibes are prescribed as compassionate.
Love it. Please share this with someone who might need it.
Yes, absolutely. Sharing is caring. Love trickle down therapy.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.